In October 2010, Nicholas Longrich was sorting through a drawer at the University of California Museum of Paleontology when he found a toe bone with a gouge in it. A V-shaped gouge. The kind of mark that only one thing makes: teeth. The bone was 65 million years old, excavated from the Hell Creek Formation in Montana. And the gouge was deep, more than 1 centimetre into the fossil. Longrich knew immediately what kind of dinosaur made that mark. There was only one large carnivore in late Cretaceous North America capable of cutting that deep into bone: Tyrannosaurus rex. He flipped the bone over, checked the identification tag, and realised the bone itself also belonged to a Tyrannosaurus rex. A Tyrannosaurus rex had been eating another of its kind. This wasn't speculation, and it wasn't inference from behaviour patterns. This was a V-shaped tooth mark on a Tyrannosaurus rex toe bone that could only have been made by another individual of the same species. Direct physical evidence of cannibalism in the most famous predator in history. And it had been sitting in a museum drawer, just sitting there, for decades. Longrich was doing postdoctoral work at Yale at the time. He'd been searching through museum collections looking for evidence of dinosaur feeding behaviour. Tooth marks on herbivore bones, signs of predation, the usual stuff. He wasn't looking for cannibalism. Nobody was looking for cannibalism. The evidence found him, and once he knew what to look for, he couldn't stop finding it. Over the next 2 years, Longrich pulled drawers at every major museum that would let him in. The American Museum of Natural History in New York, the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh, the Museum of the Rockies in Montana, the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa, the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology in Alberta, the Yale Peabody Museum. 8 institutions, dozens of T-Rex specimens, and he found 3 more bones with the same telltale marks. Let me walk you through each one, because the details matter. The first specimen was that toe bone from Berkeley's collection, UCMP 137538, a left pedal phalanx IV2. In plain English, a bone from the 4th toe of the lower feet of the left foot from a large adult T-Rex. The bone is 13 centimetres long, about 5 inches. The proximal end, the part closest to the ankle, bears 4 gouges on top and 1 underneath, all angled obliquely across the bone. The largest mark measures 25 mm long and 7 mm wide. That's an inch of tooth dragging through bone. That's not a glancing blow, that's deliberate feeding. The gouges have a classic U to V-shaped cross-section. They taper at either end like something sharp was dragged through the surface. The pattern matches what paleontologists call puncture and pull feeding traces, the kind of marks T-Rex leaves when it strips flesh from bone. But there is one more detail. 2 of the gouges are closely spaced and parallel, close enough that they could have been made by adjacent teeth in the same jaw, 2 teeth biting down at once. T-Rex teeth are spaced with characteristic regularity in the jaw. When you find parallel gouges at that exact spacing, you are looking at a feeding signature as distinctive as a fingerprint. The second specimen came from the Museum of the Rockies, MOR1126. This one is more complete. It is a partial T-Rex skeleton with multiple bones, including a toe bone covered in tooth marks. Not just a few marks, gouges on the dorsal surface, on the lateral surface, on the medial surface, on both the proximal and distal ends. Whoever fed on this carcass worked it over from every angle. And here is the detail that sealed the identification. In one of the gouges you can see long striations running through the mark, parallel lines within the groove itself. Those striations were made by denticles, the serrations on T-Rex teeth, like a steak knife dragging through meat. The spacing of those denticle marks is consistent with T-Rex tooth serrations, not crocodile serrations, and not smaller theropod serrations. This points to T-Rex. The largest tooth mark on MOR1126 measures approximately 70 mm long. That is almost 3 inches. The bone was bitten at least 2 or 3 times based on the distribution of marks across different surfaces. The third specimen was also from the Museum of the Rockies, MOR902. This one is different. It is not a foot bone, it is a humerus, an arm bone. a T-Rex arm bone with feeding traces. Think about what that means for a second. T-Rex arms are famous for being small, famously uselessly small. The humerus on a full-grown adult T-Rex is only about a foot long. There is not much meat there, certainly not compared to the legs, the haunches or the tail. For a T-Rex to bother gnawing on another T-Rex's arm, the carcass had to be almost completely stripped. The easy meat was already gone, the belly, the thighs, the ribs, the tail base, all the good stuff. Someone else got there first, and this T-Rex was picking at whatever was left. Longrich put it best in his paper. It is kind of like the turkey on the 5th day after Thanksgiving. You are trying to get the last bits of meat off of it. For the toes to be of interest, the carcass must have been pretty much picked clean. The 4th specimen was MOR 1602, an isolated right metatarsal 3, one of the long bones from the middle of the foot. This one is missing the proximal half of its shaft, broken sometime in the past 66 million years. But what remains is telling. The medial surface bears 2 score marks. The larger one measures 44mm by 4mm, nearly 2 inches long and less than a quarter-inch wide. A narrow, deep groove consistent with a laterally compressed tooth being dragged along the bone surface. The distal end of this bone is approximately 11 centimeters across. This was from a large adult animal, not a juvenile, not a subadult, a fully grown T-Rex whose foot was gnawed on by another fully grown T-Rex. 4 specimens, 4 different T-Rex bones, all with tooth marks that could only have been made by another T-Rex. This wasn't just Longrich's opinion. He had 3 co-authors on the paper, published in PLOS 1 in October 2010. John Horner from the Museum of the Rockies is one of the most famous paleontologists alive. He discovered Maiasaura and proved that dinosaurs cared for their young. He was the scientific advisor for every Jurassic Park movie. Gregory Erickson from Florida State University literally wrote the book on dinosaur bite force. He calculated how hard Tyrannosaurus rex could bite by studying indentation marks on a Triceratops pelvis in 1996. Philip Curry from the University of Alberta is the Canadian researcher who spent decades studying Tyrannosaurus rex pack behaviour and Tyrannosaur evolution. When these 4 scientists tell you the marks are from Tyrannosaurus rex feeding on Tyrannosaurus rex, you can take that to the bank. But here's the part that should bother you. These fossils were not discovered in 2010. They had been in museums' collections for years, some for decades. UCMP 137538 was excavated from the Lance Formation of Wyoming. The Lance Formation has been yielding fossils since the early 1900s. The tooth marks were visible to anyone who looked, and yet somehow it took until 2010 for someone to connect the dots. Longrich examined a few dozen T-Rex bones across multiple museums. 4 of them, representing a significant percentage of the sample, showed evidence of cannibalism. That is not a small number. That suggests this behaviour was not rare. It was routine. Now let me explain why this had to be cannibalism, not just coincidence. In the late Maastrichtian stage of the late Cretaceous, approximately 66 million years ago, T-Rex was the only large carnivore in Western North America. Period. There were smaller theropods. Dakotaraptor was around, roughly 18 feet long. Acaroraptor was present, about half that size. Various small dromaeosaurids existed throughout the formation, but nothing else was big enough to leave marks this size. The tooth impressions on these 4 specimens are too wide to be from Dakotaraptor. They are too deep to be from any raptor-type dinosaur. The bite geometry does not match any known crocodilian from the Hell Creek Formation, the only animal with teeth that big, jaws that powerful, and serrations that distinctive was Tyrannosaurus rex. And how powerful were those jaws? In 2017, a study by Gregory Erickson and Paul Gignac, published in Scientific Reports, used crocodilian bite force measurements and 3-dimensional computer modelling to calculate T-Rex bite force with unprecedented precision. They scanned the skull of specimen BHI 3033, the famous T-Rex named Stan, and reconstructed the jaw musculature based on the muscle attachment points preserved in the bone. Then they modelled how much force those muscles could generate when contracting. The result was approximately 8,000 pounds of bite force at the back teeth. That is like setting 3 small cars on top of the jaw. That is 4 tons of pressure per bite. The force at the rear teeth was measured as 8,000 pounds, but raw bite force is only part of the equation. What really matters is tooth pressure, how that force concentrates at the point of contact. T-Rex teeth were shaped like railroad spikes, thick at the base, tapering to a point with serrations running down both edges. This is tooth pressure. At the tooth tips, the pressure concentrated to over 431,000 pounds per square inch. To put that in perspective, a hydraulic car crusher operates at about 2,000 pounds per square inch. T-Rex teeth generated over 200 times that much pressure. No other animal in the late Cretaceous ecosystem could generate forces like that. When you see a groove cut an inch deep into a T-Rex bone, there is exactly one suspect. So the question becomes, was this hunting or scavenging? The honest answer is we do not know for certain. The fossils cannot tell us whether the dead T-Rex was killed by another T-Rex or died from other causes and was then consumed. But the evidence leans towards scavenging with a disturbing caveat. The tooth marks appear to have been made post-mortem. Their locations support that. They are on toes and on arms, on the small bones at the extremities, not on the big, meaty parts. If a T-Rex killed another T-Rex and ate it fresh, you would expect marks on the meatier portions first, such as the thighs, the ribs, the tail base and the neck, places with actual muscle mass. Finding marks primarily on feet and arms suggests the good stuff was already gone. The carcass had been picked over either by the same T-Rex returning multiple times or by other scavengers. A T-Rex showed up late to the buffet and took what it could get, but scavenging does not rule out a kill. Modern large carnivores routinely engage in intraspecific combat. When 2 apex predators meet, violence is often the result. And when your competitor is lying dead on the ground, why would you let all that protein go to waste? Lions kill rival males and then eat them. Male lions who take over a new pride will kill the cubs of the previous male, sometimes consuming them afterward. Among spotted hyenas, females are larger than males and occasionally kill and consume smaller males during territorial disputes. Komodo dragons are notorious cannibals. Juvenile Komodo dragons spend much of their early lives in trees specifically to avoid being eaten by adults. Studies estimate that cannibalism accounts for up to 10% of an adult Komodo dragon's diet. American alligators may experience cannibalism that accounts for more than half of juvenile mortality each year. Adult alligators routinely patrol their territories, eating anything that moves, including smaller alligators, wolves, bears, coyotes, African wild dogs. The list goes on. Large terrestrial carnivores across multiple families and ecosystems engage in intraspecific predation. It is not aberrant behaviour, it is the norm. As Longrich noted in his paper, modern big carnivores do this all the time. It is a convenient way to take out the competition and get a bit of food at the same time. T-Rex lived in an environment with limited resources. The Hell Creek Formation represents a coastal floodplain with seasonal variation in prey availability. Competition for territory and food would have been intense among apex predators. Under those conditions, killing and consuming a rival T-Rex makes perfect evolutionary sense. If you still think T-Rex was too noble for this behaviour, I would like to introduce you to Stan. Stan is specimen BHI3033. He is one of the most complete T-Rex skeletons ever found, about 70% complete with 190 preserved bones. It was discovered in the Hell Creek Formation of South Dakota in 1987 by amateur paleontologist Stan Sacrison. It was excavated by the Black Hills Institute in 1992. It was sold at auction in October 2020 for $31.8 million to a buyer who turned out to be the Abu Dhabi Department of Culture and Tourism. Stan now lives in the Natural History Museum Abu Dhabi, which opened in November 2025. Casts of Stan exist in museums worldwide. You might have seen one in Washington DC, Houston, Tokyo, Brussels, or a dozen other cities. And Stan's skeleton tells the story of a violent life. He had several broken and healed ribs. The break pattern and scarring suggest these were not just accidents. One rib shows a scar the same size and shape as a T-Rex tooth. He suffered a broken neck that fused two vertebrae together as it healed. A third vertebra became immobilized by extra bone growth. Stan's spinal cord apparently was not severed, or he would have died immediately. He lived with reduced neck mobility for years afterward. He had healed injuries on the cheekbones from close-range combat. On the back of Stan's skull there is a circular hole more than 1 inch in diameter. The hole fits a T-Rex tooth perfectly. The hole ends at a spot where a 2-inch by 5-inch chunk of bone actually broke away from the skull. 2 inches by 5 inches, that is not a scratch, that is a catastrophic injury. And then it healed, a thin layer of bone sealed over the broken surface. Stan took a T-Rex bite to the back of the head. The tooth punctured the skull and a piece of bone shattered. Stan survived. He walked around for years afterward with a healed overwound in his brain case. Whatever attacked him either gave up or died trying. The point is this: T-Rex bit T-Rex with enough force to punch through skull bone. We have the physical evidence to prove it. Stan's injuries demonstrate that intraspecific violence among T-Rex was severe and frequent. The fact that he survived multiple such encounters suggests these fights were common enough that surviving them was part of normal T-Rex life. If you're wondering whether T-Rex is the only cannibal dinosaur, the answer is no. But the list is extremely short. In 2003, researchers studying fossils from Madagascar published a paper in the journal Nature, documenting the first confirmed case of dinosaur cannibalism. Raymond Rogers from Macalester College, David Krause from SUNY Stony Brook, and Christina Curry Rogers from the Science Museum of Minnesota examined tooth-marked bones from the Maevarano Formation in northwestern Madagascar. The formation dates to the same late Cretaceous time period as the Hell Creek, approximately 70 to 66 million years ago. They found multiple bones from the theropod dinosaur Majungasaurus with tooth marks that could only have been made by other Majungasaurus. The tooth spacing, the dentical patterns, the bite geometry all matched. Majungasaurus was a 25-foot-long abelisaurid, the apex predator of late Cretaceous Madagascar, and it apparently ate its own kind. The researchers noted that Madagascar during this period was characterized by a semi-arid climate with seasonal droughts. Limited food availability may have driven Majungasaurus to cannibalize conspecifics as a survival strategy. But the T-Rex evidence did not arrive until 7 years later, in 2010. Why the delay? Partly because cannibalism in dinosaurs was not something people were looking for, partly because most fossils do not preserve feeding traces, and partly because even when tooth marks are present, identifying the species that made them requires detailed analysis that most museum studies skip. Prior to 2003, the only candidate for dinosaur cannibalism was Coelophysis, a small Triassic theropod. Some Coelophysis specimens appeared to have juvenile bones in their stomach cavity, suggesting they ate their young. But a 2006 reanalysis suggested those juvenile bones might actually be from small crocodile relatives, not baby Coelophysis. The evidence became contested, so when Longrich published his T-Rex cannibalism paper in 2010, it represented only the second confirmed case in dinosaur history. The evidence had to be airtight, and it was. Here is where we need to talk about institutions. Longrich examined fossils at 8 major museums. The specimens he found with evidence of cannibalism had been in those collections for years, in some cases decades. The tooth marks were visible. They were not microscopic details requiring electron microscopes to detect. They were gouges you could see with your naked eye and measure with a ruler, 25 millimeters long and 7 millimeters wide, 70 millimeters long, 44 millimeters by 4 millimeters. These are centimetre scale features on bones that had been catalogued, photographed and studied by generations of paleontologists. And yet nobody connected the dots until 2010. I'm not suggesting a conspiracy. Science moves slowly. Researchers are overworked. Most paleontologists focus on taxonomy and systematics, not feeding ecology. The specimens in question were not labelled possible cannibalism, please investigate. They were just bones with marks on them, but this pattern repeats across the field. Spinosaurus was displayed wrong for decades. Museums showed it standing upright on two legs like a giant Tyrannosaurus rex with a sail, when the fossil evidence showed it was likely semi-aquatic with a paddle tail. Tyrannosaurus rex posture was not corrected until 1992. Museums displayed it standing upright with its tail dragging on the ground for nearly a century, even though the skeletal structure clearly showed this was biomechanically impossible. Brontosaurus was displayed with the wrong skull for 90 years. From 1883 to 1975, museums put Camarasaurus skulls on Apatosaurus bodies because they did not have the right parts and did not want gaps in their displays. Museums are institutions, they move slowly, they resist acknowledging error, and their display choices prioritize spectacle and narrative over nuance and correction. So what do museum displays say about Tyrannosaurus rex cannibalism today? Not much. The Museum of the Rockies houses several of the cannibalized specimens. Their Tyrannosaurus rex displays focus on growth, physiology, and hunting behavior. Cannibalism gets a mention if you read the fine print, but it is not featured prominently. The American Museum of Natural History has one of the largest Tyrannosaurus rex collections in the world. Their dinosaur halls are legendary, but the narrative they present about Tyrannosaurus rex emphasizes its role as apex predator, its bite force, its sensory capabilities. Intraspecific violence is acknowledged but not dwelt upon, and this makes a certain kind of sense. Museums want visitors to leave with awe and wonder. They want children to love dinosaurs and become future scientists. The idea that Tyrannosaurus rex was the apex predator of the Cretaceous is an inspiring message. The idea that Tyrannosaurus rex ate its own species when convenient is less so. But science is not about what sounds good, it is about what the evidence shows. The evidence shows that Tyrannosaurus rex consumed conspecifics, not occasionally, not as a last resort during famine. Routinely enough that 4 out of a few dozen random specimens in museum collections showed tooth marks from members of their own species. If you extrapolate that percentage to the estimated Tyrannosaurus rex population over its 2 to 3 million year existence, cannibalism was likely a standard part of Tyrannosaurus rex ecology. Not exceptional, not rare, normal. The 66 million year old world was not a nature documentary with majestic predators respecting each other's hunting grounds. It was brutal, competitive, and unforgiving. Tyrannosaurus rex survived by being willing to eat anything, including each other. So the next time you're at a natural history museum, look at the Tyrannosaurus rex skeleton on display. Look at the feet, the arm bones, the tail vertebrae. Are there grooves in the bone surface? Score marks? V-shaped gouges? If the display allows close viewing, you might be looking at evidence of dinosaur cannibalism that the museum itself has not acknowledged, or has not prominently featured, or simply chose not to emphasize, because it does not fit the narrative they want to tell. The bones talk. You just have to know what questions to ask. If you want more forensic dinosaur investigations, the video appearing on screen now covers the only fossil that proves Tyrannosaurus rex hunted Triceratops. Same methodology, same precision, same willingness to follow the evidence wherever it leads. Subscribe if you want institutions held accountable for what they display versus what the science actually shows. Because someone has to ask the questions they won't.